Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. The highest profile service of Robert E. Lee as an officer in the United States Army may have been his role in the quelling of John Brown's raid in 1859. Here is a bust statue of John Brown with the noose hanging around his neck, the one that put him to death in 1859. Lee's official report, which is dated October 19th, 1859, was published in the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography in 1902. In it, Lee describes what happened and his role in vivid terms, and I want to share it with you. Dateline headquarters, Harpers Ferry, October 19th, 1859. He's writing to his boss in Washington, D.C., Colonel Sam Cooper, who, with Lee, later became a Confederate general. Lee writes, Colonel, I have the honor to report for the information of the Secretary of War that on arriving here on the night of the 17th instant, in obedience to Special Orders number 194 of that date from your office, I learned that a party of insurgents about 11 p.m. on the 16th had seized the watchman stationed at the armory, arsenal, rifle factory, and bridge across the Potomac and taken possession of those points. They then dispatched 6 men under one of their party, called Captain Aaron C. Stevens, to arrest the principal citizens in the neighborhood and incite the Negroes to join in the insurrection. The party took Colonel L.W. Washington from his bed. That's a relative descended from the family of George Washington, from his bed about 1:30 a.m. on the 17th and brought him with 4 of his servants to this place. Mr. J.H. Allstat and 6 of his servants were in the same manner seized about 3 a.m. and arms placed in the hands of the Negroes. Upon their return here, John C. Cook, one of the party sent to Mr. Washington's, was dispatched to Maryland with Mr. Washington's wagon, 2 of his servants, and 3 of Mr. Allstat's for arms and ammunition and etc. As they advanced and citizens of Harper's Ferry commenced their usual avocations, they were separately captured to the number of 40, as well as I could learn, and confined in one room of the fire engine house of the armory, which seems early to have been selected as a point of defense. About 11 a.m., the volunteer companies from Virginia began to arrive, and the Jefferson Guards and volunteers from Charlestown under Captain J.W. Rowan, I understood, were first on the ground. The Hamtramck Guards, Captain V.M. Butler, the Shepherdstown Troop, these are militia units, Captain Jacob Reinhardt, and Captain Albertus's company from Martinsburg arrived in the afternoon. These companies, under the direction of Colonels R.W. Baylor and John T. Gibson, forced the insurgents to abandon their positions at the bridge and in the village and to withdraw within the armory enclosure, where they were fortified themselves in the fire engine house and carried 10 of their prisoners for the purpose of ensuring their safety and facilitating their escape, whom they termed hostages and whose names are Colonel L.W. Washington of Jefferson County, Virginia, Mr. J.H. Allstat of Jefferson County, Virginia, Mr. Israel Russell, Justice of the Peace, Harpers Ferry, Mr. Terrence Byrne of Maryland, Mr. John Donahue, Clerk of Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, Mr. George D. Shope of Frederick, Maryland, Mr. Benjamin Mills, Master Armorer, Harpers Ferry Arsenal, Mr. A.M. Ball, Master Machinist, Harpers Ferry Arsenal, Mr. J.E.P. Dangerfield, Paymaster's Clerk, Harpers Ferry Arsenal, Mr. J. Bird, Armorer, Harpers Ferry Arsenal. After sunset, more troops arrived. Captain B.B. Washington's company from Winchester and 3 companies from Fredericktown, Maryland, under Colonel Shriver. Later in the evening, the companies from Baltimore under General Charles C. Edgerton, 2nd Light Brigade, and a detachment of Marines commanded by Lieutenant J. Green, accompanied by Major Russell of that corps, reached Sandy Hook, about 1.5 miles east of Harpers Ferry. At this point, I came up with these last named troops and, leaving General Edgerton and his command on the Maryland side of the river for the night, caused the Marines to proceed to Harpers Ferry and placed them within the armory grounds to prevent the possibility of escape of the insurgents. Having taken measures to halt in Baltimore, the artillery companies ordered from Fort Monroe, I made preparations to attack the insurgents at daylight. But for the fear of sacrificing the lives of some of the gentlemen held by them as prisoners in a midnight assault, I should have ordered the attack at once. Their safety was the subject of painful consideration, and to prevent, if possible, jeopardizing their lives, I determined to summon the insurgents to surrender. As soon after daylight as the arrangements were made, Lieutenant J.E.B. Stewart, yes, Jeb Stewart, 1st U.S. Cavalry, who had accompanied me from Washington as a staff officer, was dispatched under a flag with a written summons, a copy of which is hereto annexed, marked A. Knowing the character of the leader of the insurgents, I did not expect it would be accepted. I had therefore directed that the volunteer troops, under their respective commanders, should be paraded on the lines assigned them outside the armory, and had prepared a storming party of 12 Marines under their commander, Lieutenant Green, and had placed them close to the engine house and secure from its fire. 3 Marines were furnished with sledgehammers to break in the doors, and the men were instructed how to distinguish our citizens from the insurgents, to attack with the bayonets, and not to injure the blacks detained in custody unless they resisted. Lieutenant Stewart was also directed not to receive from the insurgents any counter propositions. If they accepted the terms offered, they must immediately deliver up their arms and release their prisoners. If they did not, he must, on leaving the engine house, give me the signal. My object was, with the view of saving our citizens, to have as short an interval as possible between the summons and attack. The summons, as I had anticipated, was rejected. At the concerted signal, the storming party moved quickly to the door and commenced the attack. The fire engines within the house had been placed by the besieged close to the doors. The doors were fastened by ropes, the spring of which prevented their being broken by the blows of the hammers. The men were therefore ordered to drop the hammers and, with a portion of the reserve, to use as a battering ram a heavy ladder with which they dashed in a part of the door and gave admittance to the storming party. The fire of the insurgents up to this time had been harmless. At the threshold, 1 Marine fell, mortally wounded. The rest, led by Lieutenant Green and Major Russell, quickly ended the contest. The insurgents that resisted were bayoneted. Their leader, John Brown, was cut down by the sword of Lieutenant Green, and our citizens were protected by both officers and men. The whole was over in a few minutes. After our citizens were liberated and the wounded cared for, Lieutenant Colonel S. Mills of the 53rd Maryland Regiment, with the Baltimore Independent Grays, Lieutenant B.F. Simpson commanding, was sent on the Maryland side of the river to search for John G. Cook and to bring in the arms and etc. belonging to the insurgent party, which were said to be deposited in a schoolhouse 2.5 miles distant. Subsequently, Lieutenant Jeb Stewart, with a party of Marines, was dispatched to the Kennedy Farm, situated in Maryland, about 4.5 miles from Harper's Ferry, which had been rented by John Brown and used as a depot for his men and munitions. Colonel Mills saw nothing of Cook, but found the boxes of arms, Sharp's carbines, and belt revolvers, and recovered Mr. Washington's wagon and his horses. Lieutenant Stewart found also at the Kennedy farm a number of sword pikes, blankets, shoes, tents, and all the necessities for a campaign. These articles have been deposited in the government storehouse at the armory. From the information derived from the papers found upon the persons and among the baggage of the insurgents, and the statement of those now in custody, it appears that the party consisted of 19 men, 14 white and 5 black, that they were headed by John Brown, of some notoriety in Kansas, who, in June last, located himself in Maryland at the Kennedy farm, where he has been engaged in preparing to capture the United States works at Harper's Ferry. He avows that his object was the liberation of the slaves of Virginia and of the whole South, and acknowledges that he has been disappointed in his expectations of aid from the blacks as well as the white population, both in the southern and the northern states. The blacks, whom he forced from their homes in this neighborhood, as far as I could learn, gave him no voluntary assistance. The servants of Messrs. Washington and Allstat, retained at the armory, took no part in the conflict, and those carried to Maryland returned to their homes as soon as released. The result proves that the plan was the attempt of a fanatic or madman, which could only end in failure, and its temporary success was owing to the panic and confusion he succeeded in creating by magnifying his numbers. I append a list of insurgents marked B. Cook is the only man known to have escaped. The other survivors of the expedition, viz., John Brown, A.C. Stevens, Edwin Coppock, and Green Shields, alias S. Einper, I have delivered into the hands of the Marshal of the Western District of Virginia and the Sheriff of Jefferson County. They were escorted to Charlestown by a detachment of Marines under Lieutenant Green. About 9 o'clock this evening, I received a report from Mr. Moore from Pleasant Valley, Maryland, that a body of men had, about sunset, descended from the mountains, attacked the house of Mr. Jeanette, and from the cries of murder and screams of the women and children, he believed the residents of the valley were being massacred. The alarm and excitement in the village of Harper's Ferry was increased by the arrival of families from Sandy Hook fleeing for safety. The report was, however, so improbable that I could give no credence to it, yet I thought it possible that some atrocity might have been committed, and I started with 25 Marines under Lieutenant Green, accompanied by Lieutenant Stewart, for the scene of that alleged outrage about 4.5 miles distant. I was happy to find it a false alarm. The inhabitants of Pleasant Valley were quiet and unarmed, and Mr. Jeanette and his family safe and asleep. I will now, in obedience to your dispatch of this date, direct the detachment of Marines to return to the Navy Yard at Washington in the train that passes here 1:15 a.m. tonight, and will myself take advantage of the same train to report to you in person at the War Department. I must also ask to express my thanks to Lieutenant Stewart, Major Russell, and Lieutenant Green for the aid that they afforded me, and my entire commendation of the conduct of the detachment of Marines who were at all times ready and prompt in the execution of any duty. The promptness with which the volunteer troops repaired to the scene of disturbance and the alacrity they displayed to suppress the gross outrage against law and order, I know will elicit your hearty approbation. Equal zeal was shown by the President and officers of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company in their transportation of the troops and in their readiness to furnish the facilities of their well-ordered road. A list of the killed and wounded, as far as come to my knowledge, is herefore annexed, marked C, and I enclose a copy of the Provisional Constitution and Ordinances for the People of the United States, of which there were a large number prepared for issue by the insurgents. I am, very respectfully, your obedient servant, R. E. Lee, Colonel Commanding, Colonel S. Cooper, Adjutant General, U.S. Army, Washington City, District of Columbia. So there you have Colonel Robert E. Lee, USA's, his report of the John Brown raid and his role in ending that raid in the fire engine house in Harpers Ferry, successfully capturing Brown without incident, without injury to any of the hostages that were held by Brown as part of his larger scheme. Note at the end, Lee mentions a copy of this brochure titled Provisional Constitution and Ordinances for the People of the United States. This is a document written by Brown. I'll share that in a future episode. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.